Could December Deltarune be the Roaring Night? I think is the wrong question to ask. I think a better question is, should Des be the Night? How could the existence of Des Night make for a compelling story given what we know about Deltarune and its themes? Deltarune chapters 3 and 4 have been out for about 3 months now, and the brain rot has consumed me ever since. While fans continue to speculate endlessly regarding the Knight's true identity, scouring every single clue and small detail there is, I'd like to take this discussion in a more narrative-focused direction. It's an angle of analysis that I think a lot of hardcore fans tend to forget about in their theory crafting, because I think a twist being thematically cohesive and saying something about your story and its characters is more important than the story just being unpredictable for unpredictability's sake. While I do believe that the existing evidence we're given in-game points to Des most likely being the Knight, which I'll get more into later, I'd like to make the case that not only is Des Knight plausible, but that it gives Toby Fox the opportunity to tell a very engaging story about freedom, loss, and trauma. Just a quick aside, I'm no Deltarune lore expert. I'm a bit of a newer fan myself, and I understand that there are a lot of lore tidbits and secrets, both within the game and online in ARGs, that I might forget to include in this video, so if there are any important details that I'm missing, then let me know about it. I mainly want this video to focus on why I think Des Knight would make the most sense and be the most compelling narrative choice from a casual player's perspective, who's only played the game and isn't super caught up on the extended Toby Fox lore. Because at the end of the day, casual players are going to make up most of Deltarune's audience, and the story should still make sense and be engaging from their perspective too. You can't always bet on every player being hyper aware of every aspect of your story in order for it to make sense to them. For that reason, I'm mostly going to draw on Des Knight evidence from the game itself, with a few outside exceptions. The best way I can describe the purpose of this video is it's kind of like a personal writing experiment where I get to ask myself, if I was put in charge of writing Deltarune, who I would choose to be the Knight and why. It is entirely possible that this reading of Des as the Knight gets completely debunked by chapter 5, and that's okay. There's always merit to exploring and stretching the fiction of your favorite stories to see what meaning you can find, even if you're not always 100% on the mark. So I hope some of the ideas I bring up here might inspire you to keep thinking and keep digging too. What are Deltarune's themes? Before I start providing evidence for why I believe the game is leaning towards Des being the Roaring Knight, I want to discuss Deltarune's story more broadly and what messages I believe are being conveyed through its theming. I believe Deltarune's narrative is primarily about two things: freedom and letting go of the past. One of the most interesting conflicts in Deltarune is the battle between Kris's and the player's agency. By playing as Kris, the player is in many ways robbing Kris of their autonomy, their ability to make their own choices, and to be their own person. This lack of personal freedom and agency is in some way a present theme in the lives of almost every main character. And throughout the chapters so far, we're already seeing the ways in which these characters fight against their limits and break the social and emotional boundaries that trap their freedom. Characters like Susie and Rousey both come to slowly reject their seemingly predestined roles. Susie labeled as the problematic mean girl who no one understands, and Rousey as subservient to the prophecy and to the Lighteners. These characters grow and free themselves from these restrictive boxes. They learn that it's okay to be vulnerable, and that they aren't required to follow what fate has set out for them. Other characters like Noelle and Birdley also develop arcs themed around personal freedom and breaking free of adult expectations. Noelle slowly learning to stand up to her mother and solidify her own agency, and Birdley dealing with his gifted kid syndrome and learning that you don't always need to live up to other people's expectations. The primary force that stops characters from reaching personal freedom within the world of Deltarune is an obsession with the past. While Dark World antagonists like King, Spamton, and Tenna all seek to both metaphorically and literally cut the strings of the past that bind their freedom, they do so by denying the freedom and autonomy of others around them. The King's grudge against the Lighteners and obsession with revenge is what drives a wedge between himself and his son, sidelining Lancer's own feelings. Spamton's desire to break free from his past mistakes and become a big shot comes at the cost of killing Kris and their friends and aiding with the Weird Root. Antenna's obsession with the past and twisted sense of nostalgia manifests in the extremely controlling and manipulative ways he torments the heroes of his game show. Everyone in Deltarune, both Lighteners and Darkners, are attempting to break the chains that tie them to the past, but what sets the actions and the morality of the protagonists and antagonists apart is that the journey towards freedom embodied by Kris and their friends is one that doesn't come at the expense of others. With the adults in the Light World, while we still don't know the full motivations of characters like Asgore and Carol, what we've been shown so far suggests that they are people who also cling desperately to the past, with the disappearance of Des being the seeming catalyst for these characters' obsession with turning back time. Asgore's failure to solve Des's disappearance is heavily implied to have cost him his job and broke his marriage as well. Meanwhile, Carol lost one of her own children, and without knowing it has warped her grief in a way that suffocates Noelle's agency to be her own person. In Undertale as well, we also saw glimpses of these themes in the actions of Undyne and King Asgore, who believed that their only chance at freedom had to come at the cost of humans around them. With senses of being free and being trapped directly juxtaposed by Deltarune's hero and villain characters, it would make sense for the Knight to embody this struggle in some way, given they are the game's main antagonist. Perhaps the Knight is just as stuck as those it seeks to control, as well as those who seek to control it. In a lot of ways, I think the Roaring Knight is meant to parallel Flowey from Undertale. Flowey was a character who also believed his freedom could only be achieved through sacrifice, which, in Asriel's case, he was correct in a way, after absorbing the human souls. But at what point can we sacrifice one life to bring back another? I believe Deltarune wants to remind us that a hard lesson to learn is that you can't chase the past, to try and bring back what's already gone. There's only one ending, and that ending is death. Des is a character that haunts the narrative of Deltarune, her presence always looming over the characters' minds and driving many of their motivations in ways both subtle and explicit. Her unexplained disappearance broke both Noelle's and Kris's families apart, and given how dramatically this event has affected the characters like Kris, truly finishing Deltarune will need to require putting this mystery to rest. There just can't be a happy ending if this trauma remains unaddressed. You can't obsess over the past, but you can't run away from it either. And for Kris specifically, it seems like their motivations are deeply tied to a guilt that surrounds Des's disappearance, which appears to have been greatly affecting their behavior from the past to the present. We know from Noelle that her, Asriel, Kris, and Des all used to be close friends as kids, and their families would spend a lot of time together. Before we meet Kris at the start of the game, we know that they used to be an avid prankster and very close to the Holiday family. And given Kris's positive social life as a child, it's starkly contrasted by how lonely and isolated they appear at the start of the game. Their room is barren, they don't talk to anyone at school, and they seem avoidant of their own brother, only barely bringing him up. Whatever happened to Des, Kris seems to blame themselves for it on some level, given their withdrawal from Noelle and from their own family.
Huh? No, you've got it totally wrong. Kris and I are just, friends? Kris has been my neighbor forever. We've been through so much, sometimes it feels like we know each other better than anyone. Yet, somehow, it's hard to say we're exactly friends. Yep, that's right, we're friends. It's surprisingly nice just hearing Kris say that. Hi honey, how was your group project? I can give you a ride home in a minute, I'm just... Oh, no need? You're still spending time with a friend? Oh dear, 2 days in a row, Kris, is that a record? Have fun, honey, be back before sunset.
My theory, that I think is supported by evidence within the game, is that Kris had a direct part in Des's disappearance, most likely through some kind of accident. It would explain their avoidance of Noelle, and could possibly reframe a lot of their more dubious and strange actions as being fueled by a sense of guilt and trauma for causing whatever happened to Des. A sense of guilt that the narrative appears to hint is being taken advantage of by the adults in Kris's life. Here's what I think. Des went missing or possibly died inside the shelter, an event Kris was present for and witnessed. A highly traumatic event that Kris's own misplaced guilt for is what motivates them to try and undo their past mistakes in any way possible. We know from Noelle that the old friend group had visited the nearby forest before.
Don't you miss exploring, Kris? Back when the 4 of us were kids? Gosh, remember that night we explored the forest behind the graveyard? I know we never found anything interesting back there. I mostly remember crying because I was scared. But for some reason, I feel nostalgic thinking about it. Des wiping away my tears with Azzy's jacket, with warm sleeves that smelled like cinnamon. I guess I didn't mind being scared if it meant someone would comfort me.
Given Des's apparent interests in horror movies and military memorabilia, an abandoned Fallout bunker seems like the perfect place that she would want to explore, possibly alongside Kris. If we are to assume the voice in the code belongs to Des, this particular passage seems to give credence to this interpretation.
I always did have that nightmare, walking into the darkness with the light shining from the doorway. Then the door slams behind me, and everything goes black. Is this that nightmare, or was everything else a dream?
What happened to Des after this point is hard to speculate on, given our current lack of knowledge about Des's disappearance, but I imagine through some supernatural process, Des eventually became the Roaring Knight. Something Kris might have accidentally caused, but nevertheless blames themselves for. Kris was most likely alone when this accident happened, given Noelle's unawareness of the situation and friendliness towards Kris, but Azriel is a stranger case. If Kris really did believe they were guilty for Des's death, then perhaps their strange attitude towards Azriel displayed throughout the game could be seen as intentional avoidance more than anything. Notice that Kris never brings up Azriel themselves without direct prompting by the player or by other characters. And you know what? I would probably avoid my brother too if I thought I killed his best friend and as a direct consequence caused our parents' divorce. Suddenly, Kris's previous avoidance of Azriel and Noelle starts to make sense if they're suffering from a guilty conscience. I have to think that, if this reading of Kris's character is accurate, then we're going to have to seriously deal with these emotions at some point during the story. With Death Knight theory, Kris's freedom is directly tied to their acceptance of what happened to Des, which is given extra layers of drama given that she acts as the game's main villain. For Kris to rid themselves of their guilt is to remove the control others have over their emotions, finally granting them the freedom to live within the present rather than the past. Throughout the game so far, a single question has always lingered in the back of my mind. When will Kris get their freedom? Kris, Asgore, and Carol all seem to be motivated in similar ways by the same tragic event, an event that irreversibly uprooted each of their lives. An event that they want nothing more than to go back and redo, to pretend it never happened, to just have things go back to the way they were. It's not a coincidence that Chapter 4 of the game shows us Dark Worlds have the power to bring back the dead. If they can do that, then maybe they can bring her back too. But to what end and at what cost? Now, I'm not saying that I think Carol or Asgore are completely unsympathetic or evil people. Their actions are clearly motivated by a deep and twisted sense of loss. But whatever it is they're doing in the Dark World, whether it's for the purposes of bringing back Des or not, it's actively hurting the living people around them. And how about Kris? Where does Kris fall into this whole scheme? If we're going by this piece of dialogue, we're to assume that Carol at least knows about the soul, and if that's the case, is she the one manipulating Kris and forcing them to carry out whatever Des revival plan she has? Why does Kris continue to keep the soul around, to deny themselves their own agency in their own life, while the soul forces them to lie to their friends and put them in constant danger? Is this all in service for a prophecy that might not even come true, or is there a much darker, more personal motivation that guides Kris's actions? If Kris is a character motivated primarily by a sense of guilt, it would help to rationalize their uneasy alliance with the Knight and its allies. They seem to have convinced themselves that this is the only way to make things right, and in chasing their mistakes, they can never cut the clear strings that bind them. And what about Chapter 4's phone call? Whether you want to believe the voice on the other end is Carol, or the Knight, or both, any of these possibilities would be incredibly disturbing and upsetting to think about as they relate to Kris's unwitting participation in this plan. If Carol was the one on the phone, it would imply that she has knowledge about Dess's disappearance and is possibly using it to emotionally manipulate and blackmail Kris into working with her. I'm led to believe that Carol, an adult, is blackmailing and emotionally manipulating a literal teenager with the death of their friend, presumably to use them in some ridiculous Dark World plan to bring back her missing daughter. This could likely be what the promise was referring to at the end of Chapter 4. Something along the lines of, "You promised me you would help me bring her back. This is your fault, after all." If it was instead the knight on the phone, Kris might be making a similar promise, but for an entirely different, yet equally upsetting reason. Helping an evil entity wearing the skin of their friend in the slim chance they could snap her out of it. No matter how you slice it, someone other than the player is controlling Kris, manipulating their emotions and denying them their freedom in the process. Being free in the narrative of Deltarune means being free from everything that seeks to control you. There can be no compromises. If we're meant to assume from the prophecy that the heroes will eventually have to do battle with the knight, then I wonder how it will play out and what thematic messages can be conveyed about this conflict. If Kris and the heroes are seeking the freedom to make their own lives and to write their own destinies, then it would be narratively satisfying to see them triumph over the knight who stands in the way of those goals. The knight should act thematically as a being that challenges the binary between freedom and unfreedom, a being who is both a force for the future and a ghost of the past. Having the knight come to represent Des and Kris's twisted emotions towards her ultimate fate gives Kris an even larger personal stake within this fated conflict. Destroying the knight can't just be a simple battle of strength, it also needs to resolve Kris's own inner guilt and allow them to free themselves of their past mistakes. Vanquishing the knight means vanquishing the haunting grudge it represents, and I think that Des is the best character Toby Fox could use to explore the thematic elements of this particular relationship to their most dramatic and resonant potential. This isn't to say that the existence of Rudy or Carol Knight couldn't make for their own compelling commentary on Deltarune's themes, and just make a solid narrative in general. They just don't seem to have as much of a personal connection to Kris in comparison to Des, and I think it's important for the story's main character to have as much of a personal stake in the narrative as possible. I also just have other reasons as to why other potential knight options aren't as compelling to me from a storytelling perspective. With Rudy, he just doesn't strike me as the kind of character who is secretly obsessed with the past, or as the kind of person who would be okay knowingly putting his own daughter and her friends in danger for some dark world plot. Carol, on the other hand, seems to act a lot more outwardly malicious towards Kris and the player, and if you want to go by the interpretation of Queen and Noelle's relationship being a parallel between her relationship with her mother, it seems more in Carol's character to put her feelings and desires above others, even above her own daughter, which would explain her allegiance towards the knight but not necessarily prove that they are one and the same. I also couldn't imagine Carol aura farming like this, and generally behavior-wise the knight's actions seem to most closely mirror Des's given what we know about her personality. And as for the Azrael Knight fans, I'm sorry, but having Azrael be the big bad again after like 7 years of build-up would just feel to me like Toby Fox retreading the same twist from Undertale, which I just don't think would be as satisfying of an ending the second time around. However Deltarune's story does end up turning out, I trust that Toby Fox is going to emotionally destroy me either way. I hope I've done a decent job explaining how I think Toby Fox could make Des and her transformation into the knight a really compelling story about loss and the suffocating power of grief. Even if none of my predictions turn out to be true, I still had fun researching and writing this video, and in the process thinking about what Deltarune is trying to tell us, both as players and as people. I know I didn't pick apart every single piece of evidence for and against Des being the knight, mainly because there exists many other great videos that do a much better job at it, but at the end of the day, it's important to remember that Deltarune has lots of angles to analyze its story from, and this reading specifically shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of the discussion. Whatever Toby Fox plans to do with the new Deltarune chapters, I know I'll be on the edge of my seat waiting for them, and I hope you, the viewer, enjoyed watching this video. So thank you, and see you next time. Hey, thanks again for checking out this video. This is my first time making like a theory video like this, so if you thought it was interesting or cool, then let me know about it in the comments. If you like my voice, I have other videos with my voice in them, so maybe you'll like those too. And as always, like and subscribe.